special report from the office today, I had a thought. And the thought was the following. What do I consider the worst possible game design element that you or anyone else could possibly implement into the game that I honestly think is very bad design? My answer to that is very simple. RNG-based difficulty. Now, if you are a fan of my content, as well as Brook of Brook Opinions content, shout out, then you may have seen his video on the difference between difficulty and complexity. If you have not, I suggest you go watch that. It is a very informative video, but to summarize for my points here, complexity is the amount of options given to the player to use, but the execution of said abilities are inherently simple to understand and simple to use. An example would be the Wizard in 5th edition. They have a lot of spells, but they are very easy to use because they are just, you use a spell slot and you cast the spell. And in certain circumstances may or may not allow you to cast that spell. Whether or not you're in an anti-magic field, whether or not you get counterspelled, what have you. But difficulty is when a class actively tries to discourage you from using certain abilities. Well, I wouldn't say discourage, but utilizing their abilities and features is significantly more challenging because of the circumstances in which they apply or the resources that are used to activate those abilities. And a difficultly designed class that I think exists in 5th edition is the Blood Hunter. The Blood Hunter utilizes a resource in 5th edition, that being HP, to fuel some of its abilities, and in fact a majority of its abilities. And it is a very difficult class to make work because you have to sacrifice hit points in order to use those abilities, and hit points are what keep your character alive. And due to the nature of 5th edition not having any damage reduction abilities, any abilities that negate damage, and there's no real tank role, there's no way you can truly tank in 5th edition. You can have a lot of HP and you can have a lot of AC, but the crits will always happen and you will take damage at some point. There's no way you can mitigate or negate certain points of damage to make the resource spending of HP a worthwhile endeavor unless it is absurdly strong to counteract its cost. The problem with Blood Hunter is that its abilities are not absurdly powerful, to the point that expending that HP isn't that much of a hindrance because the ability is so strong that it's worth using the HP in that situation. It is especially bad for melee Blood Hunters, as if you are in melee, like 90 to 95% of every creature in the game, you're going to be losing HP at twice, maybe 3 times the rate. And my light just went up because it's sensitive, I'm sorry. You're going to be losing HP at 2, 3, 4 times the speed at ranged characters. And even then, if you decide to go a ranged Blood Hunter, you are still sacrificing hit points that are not as vital to your survival personally, but are still useful to have in the event of certain things. It being reliant on a resource that is difficult to regain and requires significant resources or investment to get that HP back makes it a very difficult class, but it's not a rewarding difficult class. Now, I mentioned in the beginning of RNG-based difficulty. What is the difference between regular difficulty and RNG-based difficulty? I'll tell you. The difference is that with normal difficulty, you can circumvent the hindrances and the blockades that make your class difficult. You can somehow minimize them, circumvent them, or completely get rid of them in other games and in later levels of certain games. RNG-based difficulty is difficulty based around a dice roll. And it's not like a DC, like you have to beat a certain DC in order to achieve something. RNG in this instance is a mechanic in which the outcome will always be random and you have no control over the outcome, and there's no way to minimize the outcome. An example of this, as you may have watched my video about covering Fabula content, there's a class in it called Tinkerer, and Tinkerer has a skill called Gadgets, and Gadgets has 5 skill levels you can put into it, and it has 3 branches you can go into. There's the Magitech, which is all about like the Magitech armament and Magitech constructions, essentially. And then there's the infusions, which are about infusing, obviously, your weapon with elements and additional effects. But the one I'm referring to right now is alchemy. Alchemy is the potion one. And how it works is that whenever you take gadgets, you can either take a different branch or you can increase the level of your current branch by 1 to a maximum of 3. So you can have 3 levels of alchemy and 2 levels in Magitech armament, or however combination you want to go in that way. Alchemy, however, functions as follows. Whenever you want to use a potion, you have to spend inventory points, topic for another video. You have to spend inventory points, which are very difficult to get in combat and are a very valuable resource early on. And you have to spend 2 inventory points to use 1 potion. And when you do so, you roll 2d20. And when you roll these 2d20, you have to consult 2 different charts, the targeting chart and the effect chart. And based on what you rolled on your d20s, you get to pick which die goes to what chart. So there will be a chart that has 4 different sections for 5 increments of numbers that target either a single enemy, yourself, 1 ally, every enemy, or every ally. And then the effect chart has 2 any numbers, meaning no matter what you roll, you can always choose those 2 options. But then it has options for numbers 1 through 20. Obviously, it's not 20 different effects. It's more like each of these effects have like 2 numbers that associate with them. But when you roll these dice, you can choose whether the lower d20 goes to the target or the effect. But see, that's the problem right there. When you put more skill points into alchemy, the only thing you gain is the ability to spend more inventory points to roll an additional d20. There's no way to lower your chances of getting certain numbers. There's no way to increase your chance of getting certain numbers. It's all luck-based. It's all RNG. You can't get better at rolling, and you can't guarantee better effects. In the base class, I will say that. In any of the base classes, any of their base effects, there is no way you can guarantee certain effects or minimize the amount of times you get bad effects. And that's a shame, because in the class, I think the alchemy potions are really well designed and they're really powerful, but the nature of them being RNG, it doesn't matter how powerful you make them. The fact that they are random and you can never get better at them, it's, I think, very poor design. Now, granted, I will say there are items in the game that allow you to circumvent certain aspects of the roll. So you can take the different elemental damage type potions and make them all into any. That's an item you can have. And with the new Halloween content that just came out this year, there's a heroic that you can take when you master Tinkerer at level 10, and you can take that and you can treat any targeting as between a 13 or a 17. And that basically can target either all enemies or all allies. But the fact that they had to make an item and a heroic to aid in making the RNG less RNG instead of designing the class with no RNG to begin with and just lowering the effects or making it more difficult in a different area without using a random roll, I think would have been a much better design. How I personally would do it, I honestly can't think of one at this very moment. But personally, I don't like the idea of a game mechanic telling the player, you have no choice here. If you use this ability, you are at the whim of whatever comes up. Which is why a lot of abilities in Fabula that rely on rolls are now being reworked to, instead of requiring you to roll, they now just happen, but they have a lot less powerful effect. And I think it's a lot better of a design that way, even if it's a lot less, I guess, fun if you like randomness. But the fact that they've released a class that is essentially the same thing as the Alchemist or the Tinker with their alchemy skill, in the Gourmet, which is the cook class, they have the exact same things, but they can guarantee effects. They can guarantee certain effects will happen based on what kind of food they cook. And that just happens. They don't have to roll for it. They just get ingredients. They can even purchase specific ingredients, and they can make whatever they want, whenever they want, and the effects remain the same. You can choose whenever. So the fact that Alchemist has more powerful buffs honestly doesn't matter when you have to purchase an item and take a heroic skill, and possibly even an additional heroic skill later on, to even be able to use your skill reliably. That's just my opinion. I don't like RNG-based difficulty. It feels cheap, it feels bad, and it makes the player feel really stupid for choosing a class for effectiveness when it's all based on luck.